There's a Christmas tale I must tell you, but just before we get going, to help you make sense at coming events, there's something you need to be knowing. You may have wondered how old Father Christmas gets round the whole world in one night. Some of you might say, it's a blooming long way, it just can't be done, and you're right. Why, even a school kid could tell you that distance and time don't equate. And even if Santa started in August, he'd still probably finish too late. So the guys who come up with this Christmas idea, a plan they decided to hatch. They'd have hundreds of Santas all over the world, each with their own little patch. It's a franchise thing like Starbucks. They'd spend most of Christmas Eve lying in bed to prepare 'em for working through night, and set off about 11:30 and be home again 'fore it were light. So now you know how this Christmas thing works, our story to tell were all set. How for one Santa Claus up in Yorkshire, it were Christmas he'd never forget. It were Christmas Eve in Cleckheaton, and folks there was full of good cheer. But for Reginald Clutterbuck, Santa for Yorkshire, it were busiest night of year. He brushed off his coat and he polished his boots till they sparkled in a magical way. Then he set off for budgetsledrental.com to pick up his reindeer and sleigh. He smiled at lad behind desk and he said, "I need one of your sleighs for to use." The young lad said, "Santa, you'd better sit down. I'm afraid I've a bit of bad news. The last sleigh went out half an hour ago to a Lancashire Santa in a panic. He came all the way from Bolton 'cause his own sleigh was shot. MOT were up and gearbox had it." Old Reggie trudged home up the high street distraught. There was nobody himself he could blame. He were cursing and muttering under his breath, and calling Lancastrians rude names. He looked at his watch. It were getting quite late. He'd have to think up somewhat fast. If he didn't get presents delivered on time, this Christmas would like be his last. He went out to rubbish dump he called a backyard. He'd been hoarding stuff out there for years. Being Yorkshire, he were too tight to throw out away. Then suddenly, he had an idea. He took an old iron bed that were propped against wall, that were missing a few springs and some rivets, and with 6 yards of prime Yorkshire washing line, he hitched up his 6 fastest whippets. "You'll not get away with that," says his wife, "'cause when you get up there on roofs, folks'll hear your daft whippets padding around, instead of clatter of hoofs." He had to admit she were right, but upstairs, stashed away in an old chest of drawers, were 12 sets of National Health dentures, which he sellotaped onto dog's paws. He loaded the presents up onto bed, pulled his hat down tight, then he jumped on. He buttoned his coat, gave a swish at rope, and in a chatter of teeth he were gone. His whippets were champions. They ran like the wind. Santa was having a ball. A few minutes he found, halfway through his round, to nick flag off Lancaster Town Hall. By dawn, all gifts were delivered, and whippets were all fast asleep, and Santa was sat by the fire with some port, getting warmth back into his feet. So if you'd like to believe in Father Christmas, but you can't 'cause you haven't seen no proof, knock on a Yorkshireman's door early Christmas morning. Ask to see teeth marks on roof. Merry Christmas.